Hello and welcome back to the channel. How are you getting on with Lockdown 2? 2 months ago I posted around the idea of knowns and unknowns, and since this seems to have been a helpful idea, I thought I'd revisit it in the light of plans we've made as a result of COVID-19. Let's remind ourselves of the main idea. There are known knowns, things we know. There are known unknowns, things we don't know, and unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know. Now that we're in a second experience of a national lockdown, how can we use these ideas to manage the latest challenges? Let's think about the things that we now know that we know. We know that unless we continue to be highly vigilant, the virus will spread and respread very quickly. So we know that measures we put in place to keep our workplaces sanitised and therefore control the spread of COVID-19 are extremely important. We also know that we can do a lot of work remotely. There are multiple reasonable cost video conferencing packages available, and these can be used successfully to transact work. As we think about the changes we've introduced in the light of these known knowns, we may decide that some of these changes, introduced in response to an unexpected challenge, should now become part of normal business. So known knowns can form the basis of permanent changes. For example, many businesses have decided that, rather than being a communication method of last resort, video conferencing will, in future, be an integral part of their business delivery model. Other organisations who have had to adapt at pace and scale to the demands of COVID-19 may conclude that these new planning and delivery timescales should become part of normal business and not just a response to a crisis. What would you say that you now know about the impact of COVID-19? What changes have you made in the light of that should now be made permanent? What then do we know that we don't know? And where we've made changes as a result of these known unknowns, what do we do with them? Here are some things I suggest that we know that we don't know. We know that we don't know when an effective vaccine will be rolled out across the country to the extent that we can scale back on other measures to reduce the spread of the virus. With recent news that a vaccine may be available sooner rather than later, we may make some changes in our working arrangements that we regard as temporary. The key characteristics of a temporary change are that we can foresee a time when what we've introduced will no longer be needed, and we can see what those changes will be replaced with. What COVID-inspired changes have you introduced which would fall into that category? What then do we do about the trickiest of the three, the unknown unknowns, the stuff coming over the hill that we can neither see nor imagine? An unknown unknown may be around what will happen to the virus when we start vaccinating. The assumption is that as a society we'll start building up an immunity or resilience to the virus, but something else may happen, something we can't predict. The virus may mutate into something else. We had news from Denmark recently that COVID-19 has spread to mink and could from them reinfect humans in a different form. But facing the prospect of unknown unknowns, you may decide that some of the temporary changes you've introduced should instead be considered as provisional changes. So what's the difference? Well, if a temporary change is one that fills a gap between the situation as is and a new situation, the characteristics of which you can reasonably predict, a provisional change is a stopgap for a future scenario, the nature of which is unclear. Unlike a temporary change, you know neither when this response will have an end date, and it may need to be adapted and modified further in the light of a possible but as yet undetermined future that we can't predict. One of the greatest challenges we face through COVID is managing the level of uncertainty that we're faced with. As well as the additional practical work this generates, we have an emotional weight to bear. But using these categories can help us, our colleagues and people in our wider networks to create levels in which to manage these challenges. Where you've discovered a better or more flexible way of working that you wouldn't have addressed but for COVID-19, you can celebrate this unintended benefit, that some good has been extracted from this otherwise horrendous situation. Categorising a change as temporary opens up some light at the end of the tunnel and a clear sense of hope, not only that the current restrictions will come to an end, but also a clear vision of what will replace them. Provisional changes are unwelcome in that you can't see where the end point will be, but naming them as such ensures you adopt the right footing with which to face them, and positions you to respond with yet more flexibility and creativity should further surprises appear over the horizon. So what permanent changes will you be making in the light of your known knowns? What changes can you confidently regard as temporary in the light of your known unknowns? And how could you use provisional changes to position yourself to respond with courage and flexibility to further as yet unknown unknowns? As ever, thank you for tuning in.